Mr. and Mrs. Bennet's modest estate in Hertfordshire was entailed away from their only heirs, their 5 daughters, unless one of them could secure a wealthy husband. Mrs. Bennet, obsessed with marrying off her girls, urged her husband to call on the new gentleman in the neighborhood, Mr. Bingley of Netherfield Park. At the Meryton Assembly Ball, Mr. Bingley exhibited such agreeable manners that he immediately captivated the elder Bennet daughter, Jane, while his friend, the proud Mr. Darcy, declined to dance with Elizabeth, remarking that she was barely tolerable. Elizabeth, quick-witted and observant, resented Darcy's haughtiness, even as she privately admired his fine countenance. Thus, the seeds of attraction and animosity were sown in a single evening. Back at Longbourn, Jane's gentle disposition was praised, and Elizabeth teased her sister about Bingley's attentions. Mrs. Bennet, guessing loudly at a match, embarrassed them all. When Jane was invited to dine at Netherfield and stayed overnight due to a riding-induced cold, Elizabeth rode over to care for her, much to Darcy's surprise. Observing her unguarded warmth and lively conversation, his prejudice against the Bennet family began to waver, though his companion Bingley remained blissfully unaware of the tension. Elizabeth, meanwhile, felt delight at Jane's improving health, but chafed at the subtle dismissals of Caroline Bingley, who sought to pique Darcy's interest by belittling Elizabeth in his earshot. In London that winter, Mr. Collins, the Bennet girls' obsequious cousin and heir to Longbourn, announced his intention to visit. A clergyman with no independent fortune, he planned to secure his position by marrying one of the Bennet daughters. Elizabeth and Jane returned home to Longbourn, where Mr. Collins's ridiculous flattery and self-importance quickly made him a figure of amusement. Elizabeth particularly found his obsequious apologies for Lady Catherine de Bourgh's criticism of Mrs. Bennet both excessive and absurd. Yet despite his pompous airs, Collins's offer of marriage was sincerely held. When Mr. Collins proposed to Elizabeth, she declined emphatically, citing her desire for true affection over convenience. Shocked by her refusal, Collins accepted her decision with awkward decorum and soon shifted his attentions to her friend Charlotte Lucas. Charlotte, at 27 and fearing spinsterhood, pragmatically accepted his proposal. Elizabeth, horrified yet respectful of Charlotte's choice, prepared to visit her at her new home in Kent, the parsonage at Hunsford, under the patronage of Lady Catherine. At Hunsford, Elizabeth met Lady Catherine de Bourgh, a domineering noblewoman and patron of Mr. Collins, who immediately sneered at the Bennet family's lack of connections. Caroline Bingley was also present, eager to recruit Elizabeth into her circle so that Darcy, their mutual acquaintance, might be encouraged to pay court. Darcy himself arrived, his displeasure at seeing Elizabeth tempered by a reluctant admiration for her vivid wit. He praised her lively eyes, prompting Caroline to attempt, unsuccessfully, to redirect his attentions toward herself. One afternoon, Elizabeth received a letter from Jane, informing her that Mr. Bingley had abruptly left Netherfield for London and had not returned, apparently under Darcy's advice. Jane, believing herself slighted, was heartbroken. Learning of his departure, Elizabeth's prejudice against Darcy deepened. She became convinced that his cold pride had ruined Jane's hopes. While staying at Hunsford, she expressed these suspicions to Darcy himself, who listened in silence and grew more intrigued by her fearless honesty. Late one evening, Darcy called on Elizabeth alone, and much to her astonishment, proposed marriage. He declared that despite her family's improprieties and her inferior connections, he had loved her against his better judgment and risked his reputation to declare his passion. Furious at his arrogance, his assumption of superiority, his interference in Jane's affairs, and his patronizing tone, Elizabeth rejected him with righteous indignation. She accused him of cruelty toward her sister and general contempt for her family, insisting she could never accept a proposal so ill-conceived. Darcy, stunned by her refusal, retreated with wounded pride. The next morning, however, he handed Elizabeth a letter, begging her to read it in private before judging him too harshly. She returned to her room and unfolded the fine parchment. In the letter, Darcy explained his role in separating Bingley and Jane. Bingley had felt Jane's interest to be lukewarm after her cold carriage at Netherfield door, and Darcy, convinced Jane did not truly esteem him, believed relief from improper entanglement would be best for his friend. He also revealed his actions regarding Mr. Wickham, the handsome militia officer whom Elizabeth had warmly befriended. Wickham had once been engaged to Darcy's beloved sister, Georgiana, and had squandered an annual stipend promised her. When Darcy refused further allowances, Wickham turned to slander. Darcy insisted that Wickham's stories of injustice were fabrications, supported by official documents he enclosed. Elizabeth's sense of triumph at vindicating Darcy's actions was almost immediate. His letter left no doubt about Wickham's duplicity. Yet she was shaken to discover how little she had truly known either man. Her prejudice had blinded her to evidence of character, and she found herself ashamed of her hasty judgments. Returning at once to Longbourn, Elizabeth contemplated the letter's revelations. Jane greeted her with familiarity, but remained sorrowful over Bingley's mysterious abandonment. Elizabeth gently chided her sister for too readily assuming kindness in everyone, but pledged to aid her melancholy spirit. In conversation with Mrs. Bennet and Mary, Elizabeth found little sympathy. Mrs. Bennet blamed Darcy for everything, while Mary lectured on morality from her favorite books. News arrived that Lydia, the youngest Bennet sister, abrasive, headstrong, and fond of the militia, had eloped with Wickham and was missing. Panic seized the Bennet family. Lydia's reputation, and by extension her sister's, would be ruined unless she was retrieved and married. Elizabeth, remembering Wickham's true character, recognized the gravity. Only Darcy could influence Wickham, given their private history. She resolved to ask Darcy's aid. Elizabeth journeyed to visit the Gardiners in London, hoping to prepare a plea for Darcy's intervention. At Pemberley, Darcy's magnificent estate in Derbyshire, she witnessed his courteous hospitality to all his guests. He treated her aunt and uncle with genuine warmth, spoke freely of Jane and her family's virtues, and managed his household with kindness rather than condescension. Elizabeth's gratitude and affection deepened, yet she still brooded on Lydia's peril. When she finally confessed her distress, Darcy immediately offered assistance. Upon her return to Longbourn, Elizabeth found the household in uproar. Lydia, youngest and most flighty Bennet sister, had slipped away from Brighton under cover of night with Mr. Wickham, the militia officer whose handsome manners she admired far more than his character. The news arrived in disjointed fragments, Mrs. Bennet shrieking at breakfast, Mary solemnly reading moral tracts by candlelight, Kitty fretting over her sister's impropriety, and Jane weeping in silence. Elizabeth's heart clenched with guilt. She had warned Lydia against Wickham's vanity, yet her advice had gone unheeded. The very stability of the Bennet family, already on precarious financial footing due to the entailment of Longbourn, now teetered on scandal. In Hertfordshire society, a young woman's reputation was her currency. For Lydia to vanish with a fortune-hungry officer, unchaperoned and unmarried, risked the disgrace of all the Bennet daughters. Elizabeth resolved to secure. With the Gardiners still in London, Elizabeth hastened to their home in the West End. There she discovered that Lydia had been traced to Mrs. Forrester's lodgings in Brighton, but only at great expense and diplomatic effort on the Gardiners' part. Mr. Gardiner, practical and level-headed, had written to Elizabeth of the delicate negotiations with Wickham. He demanded a proper marriage settlement and immediate consummation of their clandestine elopement in exchange for silence. Elizabeth, chastened by the knowledge of her sister's folly, composed a letter to Darcy, recounting the full gravity of the situation and appealing to his sense of honor. She praised his integrity, confessed her renewed gratitude for his former explanations, and entreated his assistance. Though such a request humbled her pride, she knew that only Darcy's influence over Wickham, born of past obligations, could ensure Lydia's rescue from ruin. She sealed the letter with trembling fingers and entrusted it to a trusted courier bound for Derbyshire. Within days, Darcy's reply arrived, terse, respectful, and infused with resolve. He would depart for London at once. Elizabeth's spirits, depressed by anxiety, mounted at the thought of Darcy once more crossing her path, no longer as a rival in pride, but as an ally in crisis. True to his word, Darcy journeyed, engaged Wickham in a discreet conference, and confronted him with the undeniable truth that marriage was his only recourse if he wished to regain any respectability. Still, Wickham proved obdurate. He demanded a marriage settlement far beyond his means. Darcy, however, quietly provided the necessary sum, paying off Wickham's debts and procuring a marriage license on the condition that the ceremony take place within days. When Elizabeth learned of these actions, first through Darcy's modest letter to her aunt and uncle, and then from her own subsequent meeting with her rescuer, she experienced a tumult of emotions: relief, gratitude, and a poignant recognition of how profoundly her initial prejudices had misjudged his character. Soon after, Lydia and Wickham arrived in Derbyshire, newlywed and scandalously gleeful. Lydia's irresponsible chatter threatened to expose every detail of Darcy's intervention, but Darcy insisted upon her discretion. He would pay for her carriage home and cover the modest expenses of their marriage. At Pemberley, he treated the couple with courteous civility, though his countenance betrayed his concern for the moral welfare of his friend and the honor of Elizabeth's family. Elizabeth accompanied the Gardiners on this unexpected journey, witnessing Darcy's steadfast commitment to righting a wrong he felt partially responsible for. The sight of Lydia's hasty union, contrasted against Darcy's tempered generosity, illuminated for Elizabeth the true measure of his integrity, a devotion to principle rather than pride alone. As they departed, Lydia announced indiscriminately that Mr. Darcy, he was the person who saved us. Elizabeth winced, but felt her heart swell with gratitude and something more tender still. Back at Longbourn, word of Darcy's covert heroism spread among the Bennet household, transforming whispers of scandal into declarations of wonder. Jane, serene and forgiving, praised Darcy's magnanimity. Even Mrs. Bennet, once deafened by her own fears, found her voice to thank him in a letter that Elizabeth carried to Derbyshire. Meanwhile, Mr. Bingley, whose attachment to Jane had never truly faltered, returned to Netherfield at his friend's urging. He spent weeks in Hertfordshire, dutifully honoring every social invitation extended by the Bennets, and rekindled his courtship of Jane in full view of the provincial world. His sister Caroline, who had once whispered disparagements of the Bennets' manners, fell silent before Jane's gentle grace. At last, under the gabled windows of Longbourn, Mr. Bingley knelt before Jane and asked her to share his fortune and his life. She said yes with tears of joy, her soft laughter ringing through the drawing room. Elizabeth, thrilled for her sister, felt as though her own fortunes were shifting too. A fortnight later, Darcy himself appeared at Longbourn, announced by the deep rumble of his carriage wheels and the formal knock at the door. Elizabeth's pulse quickened as she descended the staircase. The bearing of his fine coat, the courteous bow with which he greeted her mother, the quiet amusement in his dark eyes, all testified to a man transformed. Yet beneath his composed exterior, Elizabeth detected an unusual warmth. He expressed delight at Jane's engagement, conveyed satisfaction at Lydia's safety, and spoke with genuine interest in the improvement of the Hertfordshire air for one recovering from nervous trouble. In conversation with Elizabeth, he revealed that he had long admired her vivacity and moral courage, and that witnessing her indignation and compassion during recent trials had drawn him to esteem her far more than his pride once allowed. As they walked in the sunlit garden, exchanging honest observations on character and society, Elizabeth felt the embers of affection, long suppressed by wounded prejudice, glow into a steady flame. At twilight, by the rose-arched trellis, Darcy paused and spoke his truth. He spoke not as a proud nobleman condescending to a lively country girl, but as a man humbled by love and gratitude. He confessed that his esteem for Elizabeth had grown beyond reason, that her courage in confronting him, her integrity in caring for her family, and her unguarded wit had captivated his heart. Elizabeth listened, her own reservations melting before the sincerity in his voice. When he fell to one knee and offered himself to her wholly, his name, his fortune, and his honor, she found no reluctance left in her breast. Tears glimmered in her eyes as she accepted, acknowledging that she too had once misjudged him, but now understood the depth of his character. In that moment, pride gave way to humility and prejudice to trust, sealing their mutual fate. Before their engagement became public, a final test arrived. Lady Catherine de Bourgh stormed into Longbourn unannounced, her imperial manner filling the hall. She demanded that Elizabeth deny any engagement to her nephew, citing his unworthy connections and the impropriety of lowering his name. Elizabeth, firm yet respectful, refused to be intimidated. Darcy, summoned to the fray, did not hide his displeasure at his aunt's intrusion. He declared his intention to marry Elizabeth with the approval of his own heart, irrespective of her rank or alliances. Lady Catherine, defeated by their united front, withdrew in a flurry of offended dignity. The Bennet family, witnessing this triumph of character, celebrated not only the union of Elizabeth and Darcy, but the final vanquishing of arrogance in favor of mutual respect. Preparations for the double wedding, Jane with Bingley and Elizabeth with Darcy, consumed the spring. Invitations were sent to friends and family alike. The Gardners from London, the Lucases from Kent, and even the reluctant Collins couple, who arrived with exaggerated congratulations. At Longbourn, grand tents were erected in the orchard, flowers woven through every arch, and music summoned for a festive ball. Amid the bustle, Elizabeth found serene contentment. She and Darcy strolled among budding hawthorns, discussing plans for Pemberley's garden improvements and her mother's delight in wedding finery. Jane tended to Lydia's irrepressible chatter, ensuring no scandal marred the occasion. Mr. Bennet presided over poetry readings in the morning, jesting about the follies of youth, while Mrs. Bennet flitted from guest to guest, her laughter ringing as she bragged of her daughter's fortunes. On a radiant June morning, the two pairs were wed in the modest parish church adjoining Longbourn. Elizabeth's simple gown of white muslin, trimmed with a sprig of myrtle from Pemberley, symbolized purity and new beginnings. Darcy stood beside her, his pride humbled into joy. Jane, resplendent in pale blue, and Bingley, beaming with good humor, pledged their vows in equally heartfelt tones. The congregation, kinsfolk, friends, and neighbors applauded beneath vaulted ceilings, tears mingling with smiles. As the organ's final chords faded, Elizabeth and Darcy exchanged a knowing glance. Theirs was a union born of understanding, respect, and love, transcending the very pride and prejudice that once divided them. In the months that followed, Elizabeth took up residence at Pemberley, where Georgiana Darcy, once shy and reserved, welcomed her new sister warmly. Under Darcy's thoughtful guidance, the estate flourished. Neglected outbuildings were restored, the tenant cottages repaired, and a schoolroom established for local children. Elizabeth's vivacious wit enlivened the quiet halls, while Darcy's steady counsel tempered her impulsiveness. Georgiana, freed from decades of timidity, blossomed into a confident companion. The Bennet sisters continued to visit, their bonds of family and friendship strengthened by trials overcome. Lydia, now a dutiful wife, learned restraint under Wickham's watchful eye. Bingley and Jane settled nearby, their laughter drifting across the fields in golden afternoons. Thus ends the tale of Elizabeth Bennet and Fitzwilliam Darcy, whose initial misjudgments gave way to profound understanding. In triumphing over Pride and Prejudice, they forged a partnership of equals, one grounded in honesty, mutual respect, and compassion. Their story reminds us that true worth lies not in birth or fortune, but in the moral courage to confront error, the humility to change one's heart, and the generosity to forgive. And so, in the gentle Hampshire countryside and the graceful halls of Pemberley alike, love and integrity reigned supreme, as both families embarked on lives enriched by the lessons of the heart. In the first months of their marriage, Elizabeth and Darcy established a comfortable rhythm at Pemberley. Elizabeth delighted in arranging morning rides through the deer park, where she introduced Darcy to her favorite walks among shaded glades and murmuring streams. Darcy, in turn, showed Elizabeth the workings of the estate's farms, explaining crop rotations, tenant agreements, and the importance of fair rents. Over shared breakfasts of fresh buttered bread and park-raised venison, they exchanged candid observations. Elizabeth teasing Darcy about his solemn study of ledgers, Darcy admiring Elizabeth's keen ear for the tenant's concerns. In the evenings, they sat together in the library, Elizabeth reading aloud passages from the novels she adored, Darcy listening with genuine pleasure. Their conversations, once strained by misunderstanding, now flowed freely, punctuated by laughter and mutual respect. In this gentle domesticity, they discovered that marriage could be both a partnership of equals and a continual source of discovery. Georgiana Darcy, long sheltered by her brother's anxious guardianship, flourished under Elizabeth's sisterly care. Elizabeth encouraged Georgiana's timid musical talents, arranging informal concerts in the drawing room where Georgiana's soft harp melodies were accompanied by Elizabeth's clear soprano voice. Darcy watched with pride as his sister's confidence grew. Georgiana began penning letters without fear, entertaining visitors with animated conversation rather than shying behind the curtains. On Sunday afternoons, the three cousins, Elizabeth, Georgiana, and little Anne de Bourgh, visiting from Rosings, shared tea and embroidery, discussing poetry and local gossip. Elizabeth's influence gave Georgiana a new sense of self, while Georgiana's gentle warmth softened Elizabeth's occasional sharp wit. Their bond became a living testament to Darcy's best choice. Welcoming Elizabeth had unlocked not only his own happiness, but the liberation of his sister from years of lonely restraint. As spring turned to summer, the Darcys sojourned in London to introduce Elizabeth to society on his terms rather than his aunt's. Darcy secured invitations to modest soirees, hosted by friends whose company he trusted, families known for genuine hospitality rather than ostentation. Elizabeth encountered new acquaintances. Lady Matlock, a widow renowned for her intellectual salons. Mr. and Mrs. Spencer, a cultured pair devoted to charitable works. And the Miss Bensleys, cousins to Darcy, who welcomed Elizabeth's wit with delight. In these refined circles, Elizabeth held her own, her reputation now preceding her as the woman who had tamed Darcy's pride. Darcy watched from Elizabeth's side, his pride in her achievements shining brighter than any London chandelier. They renewed ties with the Gardners, who praised Elizabeth's transformation and Darcy's forbearance. Before returning to Pemberley, Elizabeth and Darcy attended Parliament debates, he to attend to family interests, she to witness the civic responsibilities of landed gentry, and returned home with fresh perspectives on duty and public service. Meanwhile, Lydia and Wickham settled into a cautious routine. Gratitude for Darcy's secret intervention had spurred Wickham toward a more honest livelihood. With Darcy's assistance, Wickham obtained a commission in a reputable regiment and accepted Darcy's offer to lease a small property near Meryton. Under Lydia's exuberance and Wickham's growing sense of responsibility, their household became an odd mix of laughter and diligence. Lydia chattered endlessly about fashions and dances, while Wickham devoted himself to reviewing papers at the local militia hall. Wartime hushed in the countryside, and Wickham's red coat became a familiar sight at charitable fairs organized by Mrs. Bennet, who reveled in her daughter's restored respectability. Elizabeth noted with satisfaction that even Lydia's impetuosity now benefited her family, for her energetic spirit animated village festivals and charity bazaars under Wickham's watchful eye. Jane and Bingley, having returned to Netherfield, embarked on a life defined by mutual tenderness. Netherfield's rose gardens became Jane's sanctuary. She coaxed new blooms from Darcy's greenhouses and invited Elizabeth to join in potting flowers for Pemberley's parterre. Bingley, ever gentle, organized county dances on the lawn, Jane presiding over music and refreshments, her laughter echoing among the hedges. Their home, though smaller than Pemberley, overflowed with good cheer. Neighbors strolled in for afternoon tea. Country children gathered in the orchard for storytelling under Jane's calm direction. When Miss Bingley visited, her frosty manner thawed before Jane's warmth, and even Caroline discovered joy in caring for the Netherfield kittens. Through Jane and Bingley's union, the Bennet sisters saw a model of affection rooted in friendship and unwavering kindness. Frequent visits between Pemberley and Longbourn knitted the extended family ever closer. Elizabeth introduced Darcy to Longbourn's humble comforts: early breakfasts by the low window seat, Mrs. Bennet's delectable pancakes, and Mr. Bennet's sardonic poetry readings. Darcy learned to appreciate the boisterous harmony of 5 Bennet sisters at play and the genteel society at Meryton balls, where his presence now inspired respectful bows rather than anxious gossip. The Bennets, in turn, admired Pemberley's grandeur and Darcy's quiet generosity. Visits climaxed in annual harvest suppers. Elizabeth and Jane organized games, Darcy and Bingley judged friendly races, and Mr. Bennet delivered impromptu verses beneath flickering lanterns. These gatherings celebrated more than a family's unity. They honored the transformation of mismatched beginnings into a harmonious whole. Over the years, Elizabeth reflected on the journey from first impressions to lasting understanding. She remembered the sharp pang of pride wounded by Darcy's scorn, and how prejudice had blinded her to his virtues. Darcy recalled the stubbornness that nearly lost him the woman he loved, and how Elizabeth's fearless honesty compelled him to re-evaluate his own judgments. In their shared life, they cultivated a marriage rooted in humility and candor. Elizabeth never shied from questioning Darcy's decisions, and Darcy welcomed her counsel with respect. Their children, 2 spirited girls and a curious boy, grew up immersed in this climate of open discourse, encouraged to speak their minds and learn the value of empathy. Pride and Prejudice, once barriers, became lessons taught at bedtime in gentle admonitions and playful anecdotes. Pemberley itself evolved under their joint stewardship. Darcy instituted reforms for tenant welfare. He built a schoolhouse, funded a small infirmary, and offered interest-free loans to farmers recovering from poor harvests. Elizabeth organized women's reading circles and supported midwives in neighboring parishes, believing that moral uplift must accompany material improvement. During harsh winters, they had firewood collected for elderly tenants. In dry summers, they personally inspected wells to ensure everyone had water. Their broad-shouldered compassion attracted luminaries, philanthropists, educators, and civic reformers who came to Pemberley not for grandeur alone, but to witness a partnership of action and affection. Georgiana, once shy, became a compassionate hostess, using her fortune to fund apprenticeships for promising young women and sponsoring lectures by learned scholars. Lydia, no longer frivolous, channeled her vivacity into charitable theatricals, raising funds for the infirmary. Wickham, thankful for Darcy's early mercy, mentored recruits with discipline and fairness. Jane and Bingley's children often visited Pemberley with their governess, forging bonds of cousinly friendship carried through adolescence into adulthood. Elizabeth's mother, in her dotage, adored grandchildren and presided over annual garden fêtes with unabashed pride. Reflecting on the broader world beyond Hertfordshire, the Darcys corresponded regularly with London circles and Cornwall acquaintances, promoting relief measures during times of hardship and supporting educational reforms in nearby towns. Darcy took a seat as a county magistrate, where Elizabeth's tact and wisdom informed decisions on social improvements. They hosted debates on the estate lawn, inviting neighbors to discuss everything from village sanitation to the plight of factory workers. In these dialogues, their partnership shone. Elizabeth's intuitive empathy balanced Darcy's strategic judgments, yielding policies that earned respect from both gentry and common laborers. As decades passed, the story of Elizabeth Bennet and Fitzwilliam Darcy became local legend, a tale retold at inns, recited in schoolrooms, and celebrated each anniversary with fireworks and dance. Visitors toured Pemberley not only for its architecture, but for the legacy of a couple who had perfected the alchemy of love. Humility, transforming pride, openness, dispelling prejudice. Local historians penned accounts of their achievements. Poets composed odes to Elizabeth's sparkle and Darcy's steadfast heart. Even Lady Catherine, mellowed by age and perhaps a hint of pride in her nephew's good fortune, sent annual wreaths for the family memorial garden. In their autumn years, Elizabeth and Darcy often walked hand in hand through the park they once explored as newlyweds. They sat upon the bench beneath the ancient oak where Darcy had first confessed his love, recalling every trial that had led them there. Their hair silvered, their steps slower, they spoke softly of gratitude for each other, for the family they had forged, and for the lessons learned through misunderstanding. Around them, the landscape bloomed in perpetual renewal, mirroring the human capacity to grow beyond first judgments. When Elizabeth fell ill in early spring, Darcy attended every ministering doctor and comforted her with gentle readings of poetry. The household gathered in vigil, their unity forged not by duty alone, but by the affection that had transformed strangers into soulmates. Elizabeth recovered, and at her bedside, Darcy vowed anew to cherish her wit, her compassion, and the fearless heart that had challenged his own. In that moment, they both understood that love's greatest triumph lies not in perfect harmony, but in two proud souls yielding to humility. And so, in the rolling hills of Derbyshire, amidst the laughter of grandchildren and the echo of harvest songs, the legacy of Elizabeth and Darcy endured. Their story, once a struggle between prejudice and pride, became a testament to the power of genuine understanding and unguarded affection. In every crop tended, every school opened, and every marriage celebrated across the county, their union shaped the moral fabric of the land. Their final words to one another, spoken on a golden summer evening as the sun dipped behind Pemberley's towers, were not declarations of triumph, but of simple gratitude. Together, we learned to love. And with that, Pride and Prejudice yielded forever to the enduring strength of their shared heart.